Welcome to the theEWpodcast. I'm Eric White. In today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Eamon Armstrong. Eamon is a public speaker, a writer, and a podcast host. His podcast, Life is a Festival, is one of my personal favorites. In fact, Eamon's interview style is something I've been taking notes on for myself since the start of the theEWpodcast, and I highly recommend listening to Life is a Festival if you haven't already heard of it. On his show, Eamon interviews festival leaders and deep thinkers from around the world, including Jamie Wheal, Marian Goodell, Jordan Hall, and many others. Eamon also hosts the Psychedelic Therapy podcast through Maya Health, where he interviews guests around the topic of, you guessed it, psychedelics and therapy. Both of these shows are available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and I will provide links to each in the notes for this episode. Now, just a quick few words on this conversation with Eamon that you are about to hear. Initially, the intent of this conversation was to look at what aspects of festival culture might be amplified in society today to help us navigate this difficult moment that is 2020. It's no secret that currently in America, we have lost our sense of community, and it was my intention in this conversation to gain insight from Eamon's depth of experience at festivals, places where community is key, to find out what could be done to get that sense of community back into our daily lives. This didn't exactly happen though. As you'll hear shortly, the majority of this conversation is spent talking about mental health, and it's a great conversation that covers both Eamon's and my own personal history with mental health struggles, the role of psychedelics in recovery, the importance of actually doing the work, and much, much more. About 2/3 of the way into this discussion, we do manage to get the conversation back on its original tracks, and all goes just fine. Until it doesn't. At one point towards the end of the conversation, I attempt to make a point that I had been excited to make as I prepped to speak with Eamon. In fact, during my prep, I had imagined the flow of how our conversation might go, and this particular point that I attempt to bring up was supposed to be a big deal. But it falls relatively flat with Eamon. At this point, we were creeping up on the 90-minute mark, which we had initially scheduled as our time limit. And if you make it this far into the episode, you'll hear as I try to end the interview because we've reached that 90 minutes in a not so subtle attempt to get out of what I perceive to be an awkward situation. What happens next was totally unexpected and I think actually made the podcast better, if not slightly more uncomfortable for yours truly, but growth is always a little uncomfortable. At its core, this podcast started as a growing experience for myself, and since that has not changed at all, I've decided to leave the end of this conversation mostly untouched. You'll get to hear some of this growth happen live. I think I'll just leave it at that and let you discover what happens if you decide to stick around till the end, which I hope you do. Many thanks to Eamon for being an awesome human and bringing his A game. As you'll hear, I have looked up to Eamon and his work for a while now, and he did not disappoint. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Eamon Armstrong.
So, Eric, tell me about what we're doing today.
Yeah, so I wanted to have you on because, obviously we're going through a really crazy time in this country. There's a lot of just yelling at each other, it seems like, and a lot of
How
division.
about them debates?
Yeah. Oh my God. I could only make it like 30 minutes in, dude. It was horrible.
Awful.
Yeah.
Disgraceful.
But I wanted to have you on specifically because I know your background in festivals, your podcast, Life is a Festival. Obviously, one of the themes of it is like taking that festival spirit and applying it to everyday life. And so I was just curious to have a conversation that kind of looks at what happens in festivals that isn't happening in society that maybe we need to bring back into the mix to get us through these crazy times. Yeah, and I kind of have like a little thing written to read whenever we get started here with my specific goal, but that's the gist of it.
Cool. And I know that your podcast has somewhat of a focus on well-being and mental health. Is that accurate?
It did. I am in the process right now of kind of opening it up. The previous focus of it was kind of putting some weird pressure on me, because I do care about that because of my own experience. But it's not something that I consume all the time every day, so my podcast, I'm opening it up to be about all the things that I'm interested in, basically. And so society is one of those things, science, history. So I'm just kind of following things that are of interest to me, all with a theme of like better understanding past and present will help us have a better future is the basic idea.
That.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. I found a similar thing with Life as a Festival because I came out of global festival culture with my work at Fest 300, and I had all these amazing connections around the world of these really interesting people. And at the time, I was going to write a book, and I was like, I'll write this book that's about how to like use festival culture to make your life better, like better living through partying kind of thing.
Yeah.
And turns out that I hated writing the book. I loved talking about writing a book because that was like cool. I'm like writing a book, but I hated it was very lonely and it was very oriented towards perfectionism to like do that. And I launched the podcast as a way of kind of taking my existing community and kind of building an audience for the book. And it turned out that the podcast was just way more fun and went a lot further. And I'm definitely reaching way more people through my podcast than I would have through publishing a book and then trying to market it. Mm-hmm. And I basically cover everything that I wanted to do. But to your point and your experience, I started with Life as a Festival, and it was like a festival podcast. But I found that limiting as well. And I also am like, I'm not like, festivals isn't really the point. The point is like that joie de vivre that we experience at festivals, that kind of collective effervescence, which is the sociologist Emil Durkheim's expression for this kind of like together transforming, bubbling up, expressing ourselves. It's I want that, but that is in so many other places. And so my podcast has kind of evolved from Life as a Festival. I feel like we're already just jumping into.
Yeah, no, I'm fine. Yeah, we'll just keep going. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I'm just super grateful that you were able to get on here and spend some time with me because, your podcast I love it. I listen to it, and your style of interviewing and just your presence has been pretty informative for me in like getting to my stride with my project. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. What is it when you say the style of interviewing? What is it about the style of interviewing that you've managed that you've been able to integrate into what you're doing? What's like been most helpful for you? Just
your curiosity, man. The way that you are, your complete presence in the interview, and the way that you ask follow-up questions. And that's something that I'm still working at getting better at, is being really attentive to what the guest is saying and asking questions about what they're saying before moving on to the next thing that I want to talk about. And so that's just one aspect of how you go through your interviews that I look up to for sure.
Oh, thank you. Well, how I do that is that I do typically, sometimes I'm like a little bit lazy, I'll be honest, but typically I do a lot of research. I create a roadmap, and I have my roadmap, but I never really ask questions along the roadmap. I just have it so I kind of know the different places I want to go. And then whenever I'm listening to my guest, I'm like listening for the kind of segues and triggers into those other spaces I know I want to go. And I find that it makes it more conversational when someone's like, they're talking about something, and I have this note that I want to make sure we talk about psychedelic integration. And they're talking about how they've done this ceremony, and then they started doing a meditation practice. And I'm like, oh, was that kind of like a formal attempt at integration, or was that something that naturally happened? Like I can kind of hook it into where I wanted to go. And, it's actually something that I pay a lot of attention to, because I feel like it creates a lot of vulnerability, because when you're being interviewed and your interviewer is asking you questions, you are kind of starting again at a question. So it's like, now I want to talk about your childhood. I understand that your father, left when you were a little boy, blah, blah, blah. What do you want to say? And so at least my feeling about that is that when the interviewer is like initiating a new question, you're kind of like, okay, I'm being interviewed. Whereas if you can get to what you're trying to talk about without it really being like a new thing, it has more of a flow of conversation, at least in my experience.
No, that makes sense, because then the guest doesn't have to recalibrate their thinking. It's like they can just keep that ball rolling downhill without trying to stop it and readjust.
Right. So I could just give you podcast advice all day because I love doing that shit, but that's probably not what we're here for. So why don't you get the ball rolling, and we'll just see what we shall see.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm just going to kind of state the reason. I know I had already stated it to you, but just put it a little more plainly. I have something written that I would like to just kind of read here to get us started as per my goal for this conversation. So yeah, in this moment where, it does feel like there's something missing to me. It feels like we're all kind of losing our minds. And at the same time, it seems like we've lost touch with the things that make us a community. It doesn't feel like we're all Americans, In fact, a lot of people have shame to be an American right now, and there's not that cohesive sense of society. And I wanted you on because you're something of a festival veteran. And in my experience at good festivals, that sense of community is strong. That's like what makes a good festival a good festival. So the goal that I had in mind today was to kind of gain some insight from you about what good things from festivals are missing in society and how we can perhaps integrate those to make it out of 2020 sane.
Yeah. Well, let me just say, first of all, that we're not going to make it out of 2020 sane. That ship has well and truly sailed. Mm-hmm. In terms of the breakdown to break through, I think that what we can hope for is that we use this catalyzing time to envision a better future, and that we actually move into something properly new. And not cling to the old ways of doing things, because there's a lot about the old ways that weren't working that have been revealed, particularly in terms of like systemic fragility and sort of more complex system stuff that's not really my purview. But there's some things that we have the opportunity to change right now. And I think that the longing for congregation that you're highlighting here can be met with a kind of creativity that could innovate certain things that wouldn't have happened otherwise. An example is like the Burning Man multiverse experience. Microsoft was doing BRCVR or Altverse or Altspace or whatever they're called. But the Microsoft group was doing BRCVR for like 5 years, and nobody cared, really. But then during the multiverse experience, when everyone was looking for Burning Man, then they got to connect with that space. So I think there's opportunities for innovation into new ways of congregating and new understandings of the need to congregate that I personally think, and I'm sure this will be a question that comes up later, but like, I think that the festivals of the future will necessarily be more participatory, for example. Like, we long so much for this connection with others that when a smorgasbord of opportunities are offered to us, we're going to be less interested in the kind of spectacle of a Lollapalooza than we are in the kind of co-created participatory community of something like Desert Hearts.
And when you say participatory, can you just define that a little bit?
Yeah. So a participatory festival is a festival that you have the experience of co-creating. So it's not just that there's like, say, interactive art, although interactive art is kind of like a step in that direction, but that there's a kind of community ownership of the festival, that the festival itself is a temporary community, and that you show up to be part of the festival, to be part of the spectacle. And that can be many things. It can be how you dress. It can be, volunteering. It can be, building art and bringing art. But the festivals, the most participatory festival is Burning Man, because it's entirely participatory and it's intended to be a decommodified space. It doesn't always happen that way, but it's intended to be. And so these kind of hybrid sort of Burning Man-esque festivals, some call them transformational festivals, like a lightning in a bottle or something like that. They have some of that like energy of like, you go and you create your camp and you have some kind of offering. And as you build a relationship with the festival, you may then want to volunteer, or you may have some art that you want to bring, and you start to have this kind of relationship. And so over time, you end up being part of the creation of the festival, and that's properly participatory. Whereas something like, a Walmart style festival where it's just kind of like out of the box presented to you. You go to kind of consume and receive. It's more of a passive experience. And you might, take some acid and have a nice time. You might meet some people. You might have some, it's not cut and dry. It's not that you can't have a transformative experience at a festival like this, or that festivals like this are, absolute failures at the glorious community aspects of festivals. But when the festival is participatory, as a sort of mindset of the organizers and the people involved, it kind of has emergent properties to it that are not as available in a more transactional space. So it's, what emerges when you wire up a bunch of anxious monkeys' brains together? Like, what happens out of that? The sum is greater than the total of its parts. Burning Man most especially, but I think in some of these other festivals that are similar, we have there's this possibility of a kind of group mind, a kind of ongoing collaborative art project of the different vibes and energies of the people involved.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things that first comes to mind is just the fact that to have a more participatory experience, you need whoever is holding that space to encourage that, right? That's not something that can just be, is that something that can be done organically by the attendees at something that you mentioned, like a Walmart out of box experience? Can people show up there and make it participatory, or is it up to the space holder to create that relationship?
Can you make the festival participatory? Not necessarily, but can you make an environment that feels as I'm describing? I mean, absolutely, you can. You go to, a camping festival that is otherwise pretty commercial and transactional, but you build your camp and make it magical, and you put a little pineapple in front as the international symbol of hospitality, and your neighbors are like, oh, it's Pineapple Camp, and they're like stopping by to say hello. You're creating a sort of like more participatory enclave within that broader festival. I think that it has a lot to do with the transactionalism of the space. If everything is commodified, if everything is bought and sold, you tend to have more transactional relationships. When you're more just kind of creating for the fun of it and sharing for the fun of it, that's more participatory and involves inviting more participation. And you can definitely do that anywhere, but I don't know that you necessarily would say that would translate to changing the whole culture of the festival, unless I guess everybody showed up and did that. Right. But people have to kind of, in many cases with our culture, as transactional as it is, people have to be acculturated to this idea of kind of gifting and sharing and opening their doors to others. But there's some of that energy that I think permeates most festival experiences.
Yeah. But in society, like it seems purely transactional, and maybe, it is participatory in the sense that we as citizens make society run, right? We are the ones who make sure that things work tomorrow. But whenever the return to us doesn't feel as much as we're putting into it, then it no longer feels as though we're participants. It feels as though we're, for lack of a better word, slaves or something like that. And I think that that's something in terms of like the Burning Man experience. People are putting so much into it, and they're getting, like, what are they getting back from the festival or from the environment that makes it so encouraging to be a participant?
Well, this actually gets down to like the core of my whole life as a festival ethos, which is you always give as much as you can into the pot. And you try to encourage others to do that, because then you're raising the threshold of abundance for everyone. And so what you get back is an abundant environment. And it's hard because it's a bit of it's not the prisoner's dilemma, but maybe it's tragedy of the commons. There's some sort of thing about this where like everybody's waiting for somebody else to do the work. Maybe it's tragedy of the commons, but you give and create abundance. And then you encourage others to give and create abundance. And the reward of that is that you live in an abundant environment. And an environment of abundance can ultimately feel really transcendent. And I just would flag that obviously there's a lot of privilege involved in this. So it's sort of an enclave of abundance amidst a pretty a world of disparate fortunes. But if you can create a vibe of abundance around you, that abundance will ultimately come back to you, whether you're at a festival or not. So like I have a policy where if I have something fabulous and someone else tries it on and it looks better on them than me, then I give it to them. And I don't get anything back from that. But every time I do that, it's a fun experience of like, especially in a group setting, like, oh my God, that looks so good on you. I guess it's yours now. And then people love that. And there's a sense of abundance, like, oh, well, he just gave away that fur coat. We're in an environment where that can happen. We're in an environment where that abundance is possible. So I think there's an aspect of creating an environment of abundance that is part of it. And again, just to flag the fact that obviously there's a threshold of privilege that one has to have crossed in order to be able to share in that way. And that's one of the ills of our world and why, modern capitalism makes these more transactional relationships and makes these scarcity mentalities. But I do feel like festivals can create an experience of abundance that you can bring into your life if you're lucky enough to have more to give.
Yeah. And you're talking about economic inequality there in terms of privilege. Yeah. But wouldn't you say that even if I guess I wouldn't know because there's a certain level of privilege that I have in my life with my employment and my family having set the way for me, but there's still a way to participate in that, though, if you are not privileged, right? Like you can still be a part of that. You're not excluded from it necessarily.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when I'm talking about abundance, I actually tend to kind of like think about it in terms of materials and in terms of resources and therefore privilege. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you can participate and you can also give a lot that doesn't cost anything. I mean, you can give a lot of hugs, you can give a lot of compliments. You absolutely can create abundance that is non-material. I think that often there's a lot of material abundance that's going on in festivals. And so I think about that through the lens of privilege. But you can absolutely participate with just your ideas and your hands and your smiles and like what is available to you. So yeah, you're not limited to sharing in a way of material that therefore creates abundance. You can actually create abundance in just vibe and in positivity and in many things that people are actually hungry for that have nothing to do with your actual privilege. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a certain kind of maybe there's like a mental health privilege that comes into there where there's some kind of, some people it's harder to show up and connect in that way. Some people are more introverted, for example. So it's not like it's a total even playing field exactly, but we all have gifts to give.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would maybe push back even on the mental health thing because whenever I first got into the festival community through Desert Hearts, I was super depressed and suicidal and not doing very well at all. And how I kind of got into the community was through my video work. And so that was something that I was giving to the community. And at the same time, I was taking kind of a healing experience for myself. And it wouldn't have, had it not been for that gig working with Desert Hearts and doing video, I'd very likely still be depressed. I don't know. I would have found the tools. So I would just push back on that. And that whenever I was in that state, it did feel as though I had nothing to give, but I was in retrospect giving something. So I think that there's a space for people who are, not necessarily well to still provide something to the community that maybe they don't view as valuable, but that someone else might.
Absolutely. And I think we're kind of talking about two things, which is one, what is actually being given and the actual participation that's occurring. And then also separately from that, the mentality of either abundance or scarcity. And you speak of depression. I've had 3 major depressive episodes in my life. I have mental health, opportunities that arise from time to time. I've learned to see depression and anxiety as teachers. And so it's definitely been part of my journey to have those passengers along the ride. And I think one of the most pernicious aspects of depression is the desolation of that experience, because your brain is just not functioning in such a way that you see the positive or you see what you have to give. So your default is such a scarcity, and it's such a scarcity. Like I'm not even worth. I have no worth. What can I possibly give? And so, to tie it back to what I was saying earlier, when I was saying kind of privilege in regards to mental health, I mean that not in terms of you can't participate if you are struggling with mental health, by no means, but it's a lot more challenging to lean into an attitude of abundance when you feel like you have nothing to give in that space. So I wanted to flag kind of like that there is a privilege to having mental wellness in the context of participation, because it's just philosophically easier to align yourself with like, I'm just going to go around and give like really great advice all day, and I'm going to feel, and that'll be creating abundance. That's a lot harder to do when you're trying to drag yourself up off the floor.
Yeah. And it can also create a feeling as though you're just taking, that's something that I experienced a ton of, was feeling as though I was stealing or something, like I was pulling one over on these people whenever I was depressed and unable to see the worth that I was bringing to my community.
Eric,
go ahead.
Eric, let me ask you, what was the arc of your mental health journey? Just for context. So when did you first experience depression? How long did it last? And what was the experience of coming out of it for you?
Yeah, so I was 16 whenever the whole situation started for me. I had an uncle that was murdered in the Dominican Republic. Yeah. And
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's all good, man. Appreciate that. But yeah, he was murdered in Dominican Republic. And it kind of changed my family dynamic at home. And my relationship with my mom kind of took a hit, started drinking, went to college and was just the blackout king in college. Graduated from college, super depressed. I had tried to see therapists in college and had no success. I didn't really understand that something was wrong with me. I had no idea what was going on. And so for several years after college, I kind of just traveled around drinking a lot, feeling sorry for myself. And yeah, it was when I met the Desert Hearts guys and started doing video for them that I met my partner, Lauren, who I'm still with today. And she kind of helped me realize that, you've got something going on. This isn't normal. Found a good therapist that kind of opened the door for me. And then 2016, pretty recently, I had it was during Super Flu at Desert Hearts. I had taken some psilocybin, and I had shot video for the festival that year and years prior, but during this set, I was taking a break, took some psilocybin, and just in that moment, 1,000 different pieces all clicked for me at once. And it was one of the most, still to this day, one of the most overwhelming, joyous experiences I had this sudden rush of empathy for my mom and understanding what she was going through. And it was just like, I don't know, everything that had happened suddenly made sense, getting to see it from outside of myself in a way, if that makes sense. And so from there, it was just continuing to do the work with this new understanding, and still get sad, but much better, much better today for sure.
Are you aware that I'm working in psychedelic medicine at the moment?
I am. Yeah. The Maya Health, is it?
Maya Health. Yeah. That's why. I mean, are you up? I assume you're probably somewhat up to date on like the science around depression and psychedelics and like why you had the experience you had.
Yes. I'm not as knowledgeable as you on it, but I've read like Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind. I've done some other readings here and there, some podcasts. So I have a base knowledge.
So I'm not trying to derail the podcast, but
no, this goes.
But this is interesting to me because what you've just described is kind of the quintessential story of psychedelic healing, because as you've said quite eloquently that there was this moment of these things coming together. Your mind changed in that moment, and that's kind of like the switching off, not really switching off, but the reduced energy in the default mode network, which is the default way in which your brain operates, and then the ability to make kind of new neural connections and kind of really just change your perspective. But the key to what you just said that matters so much is you're like, and then I did the work. If you don't do the work, it doesn't stick. You can't just go have the hallelujah psilocybin or ketamine or ayahuasca or whatever it is. You don't just get that. It's actually the work. And then the work over time is what, like I said earlier in the conversation, like I consider depression a teacher. When depression comes back in my life, it's like, wake up, pay attention. Something has slipped here. And there's some lesson for you to learn. There's something that needs to change. So for example, right now I'm dealing with a lot of anxiety, because I'm going through a very painful separation that's triggering the echoes of a major attachment wound from my early childhood. And that anxiety, it's pretty overwhelming at times. And an earlier me would have done anything I can to get as far away from it as possible, i.e., blackout king in college. I had a similar kind of time. Now it's like, okay, this anxiety is actually of my body. It's of me. It's telling me something. It's telling me that something is not okay. It's being offered up to be healed. And so now, instead of like, how can I get this anxiety away from me? It's more like, how can I listen to it, be aware of what it's trying to teach me, and actually show up full power for the healing that's being offered through the portal of this incredibly distressing, anxious feeling. Breath work, meditation, yoga, solitude, some shit I haven't even thought of yet because of course I wouldn't think about it until I'm in distress. So some other shit. I'm about to go solo camping to just like, I'm going to give some of this up to nature, see what happens there. But there's a joyfulness, and here's where we'll swing back into the festival
we can stay
conversation.
Here too. It's all good. I'm good.
For me, life as a festival has increasingly evolved to more of this Stoic and Pythagorean idea of life as a festival. So Pythagoras initially, and then later a Stoic called Epictetus. Epictetus? I only read it. I don't know how it's pronounced. Talked about the allegory of life as a festival. And basically, the allegory is essentially that at a festival, there's different people show up for different things. There's the people who are competing, let's say like in this case, kind of festival a la Olympic Games kind of thing. There's people competing and trying to win. There's people coming to like buy and sell oxen or whatever it is. But then there's some people who come for the festival, for whatever it is. And they want to know about it, and they want to see it, and they want to feel it, and they want to participate, and they want to be involved in it. And so life as a festival life is a celebration all the time. It's totally not a celebration all the time. 2020 is not a celebration.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's so fucking informative. The way that it makes those of us lucky enough not to be on the front lines, the way it makes us slow down and stop and let things bubble up inside of us. So for me, anxiety and particularly like the separation distress I'm feeling in the wake of this partnership is not something that is bad that needs to be escaped from. It is part of the festival to be engaged with and to actually, in a way, dance with, to play with, to be like, what transformation are you beckoning me towards? What dark alleyway of the festival that I'm scared to go in is going to take me around a corner into some crazy jazz carnival tent that I never would have gone into if I'd chosen to be afraid and stay with what was easy and safe for me. So mental health, man, it's an interesting journey. And those of us who have had the enormous grace and good fortune of the kind of psychedelic experience you've described and who get to kind of pull back and see the bigger picture in that way, we're just so blessed because then we can pull back and see that bigger picture in so many other ways, and we had the intensity, the enormity of a major depression or anxiety. We've had these difficult things. Then when we're like dealing with the day-to-day banalities and annoyances of life, we can also pull back and be like, what am I going to learn here? How am I going to transform here? And so I try to live that way.
Whenever you do something like a solo camping trip, do you feel as though you're working on stuff from your past still, from well in your past? Or is it more of you mentioned getting ready to go through a portal. I don't know if that's before we'll start playing this podcast or not, but you mentioned looking at it as a transformative period. So in that solo camping trip, are you doing work that needed to be done in the past, or are you simply preparing yourself for what's next?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So I don't do a lot of I camp at festivals, but I'm not like a rugged camping man. That's not it's super on brand for me. And I'm planning to do a weekend where I'll be fasting. I'm going to go up to Orca Island, outside of Seattle, where I'm here visiting my brother, and I'm going to fast, and I'm going to be in nature. And when I first conceptualized this, it came out of some pretty deep pain, where I was just like, I am taking on an initiation. I am going to feel this suffering as deeply as I can, and then I'm going to just push my way through it. And thank God my thinking has evolved, because what I'm doing right now, I'm not working through something, I'm feeling and healing. And I am, as I mentioned, it's a separation distress, quite potent, that is so potent because of the echoes of a major attachment trauma as a child. So are you familiar with attachment theory?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have what's called the anxious attachment personality, and that's based on experiences from my childhood. What I've learned, and shout out to my friend Zia, who don't tell anyone, she's an astrologer, and I'm like getting it. I'm like on a bit of that ride, which is super not my vibe. Astrology is not my vibe, but she's been so on point with everything she shared with me. So I've been like leaning into that. But she basically, what she expressed is that, there's a natural pain when you let go of someone you love, of course, but the intense anxiety and kind of trauma-like response that happens for someone with an anxious attachment personality during a breakup is actually not about the person that's left or has been left. There's grieving for that person for sure, but the intensity of that is actually an echo of a childhood wound. Mm-hmm. But the thing about it is that it's not old work from childhood that you're going back to. You actually are doing the work now. So do you know the book The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk?
I've never read it, but I know of it, yeah.
Okay. And I'll give a shout out to the Psychedelic Therapy podcast, which I do for Maya. I talked to Bessel on that podcast.
Oh, cool.
And we talked a lot. Yeah, it was pretty cool. We talked a lot about trauma. And one thing that he says is that trauma exists in our reactions, not in our memories.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
that's interesting. I like that.
Yeah. So the work we do, the trauma work that we do, is actually not about, can I remember what happened and cry about it and that's sad that happened? I mean, and I've done therapy that way a lot in my life, and I think, I'm not saying there's not a place for that approach, but a lot of the work that we do to heal past trauma is by observing the reactions in our system, in our nervous system, that's really an echo of that trauma. So this incredible distress around separation, the need to reconnect with an attachment that is it's no longer time for that connection to that partnership. Maybe for this moment, maybe forever. I'm still in that in that place of will it happen again, will it not? But it's not about this moment. It's an echo of the past. But you don't go back to the past to work with it. You work with it in this moment. And so the way that I'm working with this in this moment is that when that intensity arises, and it's in my nervous system, my adult nervous system is experiencing what my child nervous system couldn't quite handle in present tense. But I experience it and I ride it, and I use yoga and I use breath work, and I do a lot of loving my little guy inside and taking care of him and saying nice things to him. I the other morning I danced and wept to God, and that's also not on brand for me to be weeping to God. But I'm engaging in the present moment as a way of healing that trauma, and I'm recognizing that the trauma it's an echo from the past that gets to work out in a new way this time. So the little Eamon who no one came for when he needed them most, that happened. That's not going to change. But the little Eamon inside who needs someone to come for him, I'm going to come for him. I can come for him now. I've learned how to do that. I've learned how to come for him. I've learned how to talk to him. I've learned how to love him. And I've learned how not to let him interact with the world in a way that's going to hurt or disappoint him. So when my reactions happen, I don't go and just ping pong around the world with them. I don't desperately reach out to my erstwhile beloved, take the pain away. I soothe him. I learn to soothe him. I teach him to trust me. And then if I do want to communicate with my former partner, who is and will always be a dear friend of mine, I do that from an aligned place. And that very process itself is a kind of healing of the trauma. So I'm rewriting the story that little boy won't be taken care of, or even that little boy needs anything but me to show up for him when he's having his most desperate moments.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of what I'm hearing from you is that these whenever we get into depressions or our inner child feels threatened and wants to act in certain ways, it's reacting to something that is in the past, but we need to deal with the reaction in the moment. So it's like you're trying to reset a habit almost that has been set in yourself from before that is responding to something present in your environment or your life.
Yeah, and more than even just a habit, like a nervous system patterning.
Right.
So let me take a moment to say, like, I'm not a therapist. I am not deeply studied on these topics beyond my own experience. I'm deeply studied on them in my own experience because I've seen a lot of therapists and I've done a lot of like stuff with this. But my understanding is your brain develops from kind of your brain stem up. It's the same way that it happened evolutionarily. You know, you have your kind of like reptilian brainstem brain, then you have your kind of mammalian emotional brain, and then you have your prefrontal cortex adult human brain. So you tend to see the world through, obviously, this prefrontal cortex, but that prefrontal cortex can't really access trauma that occurred when you didn't have it, right? So it's not a habit in the sense of like, I've been smoking rollies like a dummy, and that's a habit, right? Oh, actually, you know what? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's actually a more limbic habit too, because it's an addiction. I don't know. I don't know quite about that. Don't quote me on that, dear listener. You're resolving the patterning of trauma in like deep in your nervous system by the way that you are repatterning it in the present moment.
Right.
And so, you know, using a tool like mindfulness, for example, to not go down these like dark stories that actually kind of maintain the trauma pattern. Instead, you're like, oh, I'll just release that, and I'll kind of meditate, and I'll feel my feelings without telling a story that reinforces this kind of like nervous system projection onto the world. I think that's all as accurate as I understand it to be.
Yeah.
But again, I'm not a professional in this realm.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of brain spotting?
No.
Yeah, that's a fun one. Me and my girlfriend have done that a couple times. My therapist here in San Diego, shout out to Susanna. She's a pro at it. It's a relatively new therapy that comes from the EMDR family.
I've done EMDR.
But yeah, it's insane. It basically just requires you to look at a point. The therapist works with you to find what they call a brain spot. And basically this is a direction that your eyes look, that indicates it's triggering some trauma. And I'm also not a therapist, and I'm also not a super well read on this stuff. I just know from my own experience. But yeah, she works with you to see where it looks like your eye is fluttering or giving signals that would indicate to her that she's found the brain spot. And she has you hold it there as you're looking at this point and kind of processing the trauma you want to work through. And yeah, you experience a super massive release of just emotion. Some people curl up into a ball and cry. Some people just start laughing. But yeah, it's crazy, man. They did it with, Sandy Hook survivors after the school shooting, and they tested it against other therapies like equestrian therapy and other forms of therapy. I'm not super sure which ones, but it was by far the most effective therapy that they used on first responders, teachers, and children after the shooting, which is pretty cool.
Oh, I will have to keep my eye on that. It's funny how new modalities kind of pop up in your life in new ways of thinking about things. I find life just has this wonderful way of kind of burping up what you need next. You know, it was that way when I first discovered ayahuasca. I had again ended a relationship and then was super distressed and brokenhearted afterwards. I was actually engaged to a woman like 6 or 7 years ago, and I was totally just wrecked. I was like, I knew I had to end it. I still was in love with her. You know, and then she moved on, and I was like, what have I done?
Eamon, you're a hopeless romantic, dog. Huh?
I wouldn't say hopeless. I would say incorrigibly hopeful, whilst putting myself through various challenges, but kind of a little bit analogous to the experience I'm having now. And in my like, what can I possibly grab onto space? A friend was like, out of the blue, was like, do you know what ayahuasca is? you want to just, I was like, I feel like that's like cool psychedelics. I don't really know much about it. He's like, you want to go to an ayahuasca ceremony with me? Like in 2 weeks? It's like, fuck, yep. Huh. It's just funny. I think that there's two ways of going through life, and this is similar to the Einstein quote about miracles, but basically there's two ways to go through life. You either don't trust it or you do trust it. And if you don't trust it, you're fucked. You're a ship at sea. And if you lose your trust in the lived experience, God have mercy on your soul. That is the most desolate place to be. But if you do trust it, and I think most people are somewhere in the middle, but if you trust it resolutely, then you can say basically like, it's not to be passive, but like everything that happens is an opportunity. It's as a great therapist once said to me when I was in a pretty rough shape, maybe a decade and a half ago, was he gave me the mantra that life is a wonderful adventure and everything that you experience is a lesson, a blessing, or an opportunity. And I think probably all three.
Yeah. What you're saying about trusting life or not trusting it kind of goes back to what you were saying about whenever you feel depression, getting closer to it, right? Because you're kind of, as you mentioned, depression is a signal to you that you need to do some work. You need to pay attention to yourself. But if you resist that signal, then it's not going to get any better, right? It's kind of the same thing where you're going through life and you're either paying attention to the opportunities that are presented to you or you're just ignoring them and kind of forcing your way through it.
Well, I am not currently depressed. And if I were depressed, I would have a very different way of experiencing it. So depression is no joke, and a major serious depression, your logic and philosophy is no match for that bleakness. And so I definitely am not someone who has the idea that you just think positively about it. But I can feel...
Sorry to cut you off, but that's not what I don't want to be misunderstood here. I didn't mean that you think positively to change that depression, but it's like a signal to you that you need to pay attention to it. It's not something that you just change by...
Yeah. Basically, the most helpful thing for my whole experience of depression, was probably meditation, but actually it was absolutely meditation. But the most positive reframing in my entire experience was, this is my teacher, and it is a difficult class to take, and I don't know how it's going to go, but I know that it's a teacher. I know that when it comes, it's teaching me something. And it's not necessarily like, I'm at a place right now where I can feel one coming on, like a little one, and it's kind of like hiccups. Like I've got a good way of dealing with hiccups when they come on, but I'm sort of like, okay, I'm going to get all of my self-care tools, just marshal all my resources. But I deeper than that, I feel like if a depression comes in and it's there and you're going to be with it for a period of time, and, depression can be very scary, particularly if it leads to ideation around self-harm. But to recognize that like, I am on a magical adventure, and right now I'm being pulled into the underworld, and I'm being pulled into the underworld for a reason. And so I get down on my knees and I bow to this teacher, and I'm just like, oh God, I don't want to do this, but I guess I have to. And I haven't had a major depressive episode since 2015. And I was only in it for about 4 or 5 months. So it was like not so bad. But I'd say that like the separation anxiety and distress that I'm feeling in this moment is a totally different thing than depression, but it's definitely like a pretty rocky ride. But again, teacher, portal, opportunity. I just can't think about it otherwise than that, because it would just be too depressing.
But it's useful. I mean, like you're saying, it's useful in the fact that it takes you to your next phase if you pay attention to it and treat it properly, right? And I know from my experience with depression, I wanted to hurt myself a lot, and I did try sometimes. And there was mornings I woke up and just like stood looking in the mirror after brushing my teeth, just punching myself in the head or hating who I was looking at. And, I wonder just if my awareness of what I was dealing with would have changed the way in which I dealt with it. Does that make sense? Like during that time, I wasn't aware of how depression could be caused by something that you had not resolved in the past. I wasn't aware that I was holding on to this trauma from years before that was causing me to wake up angry every morning. So in that way, like if you have knowledge about what it is that you're going through and what it can teach you, then you can handle it better, right?
And you get that wisdom by going through it.
Yeah.
You know, like when I think about the visits of depression in my life, and specifically, I mean like major depressive experiences, they have made me so much humbler, so much more empathetic, so much more oriented towards building a robust life. I think that if I'd never, my first major depression happened when I was 17, so 18, so about the same age as you, and I think there were some tendrils of it prior to that. But if that hadn't happened, dude, I'd be like an investment banker. I mean, maybe not actually, but like the magical mystery tour that has been my life was absolutely seeded with my darkest, bleakest days. And so fuck yeah. Like, and if someone's listening right now and you are in the middle of a depression, none of this shit matters to you at all because you're in it, and in it is the worst. It's the Hermann Hesse in the book Steppenwolf, which is a great book about depression, by the way. The band was named after this book. Beautiful book. But the book has like 150 pages of just the most ruthless first-person perspective of a severely depressed person, and then it like blossoms into magic at the end. And he has so many just vivid descriptions. He calls it an empty mud hell. Ugh. My father, who's had very serious depression in his life, talks about it as a lead blanket, that you have a lead blanket on you and you just like can't get out of it. I once wrote a poem about how it's a small dark creature that crawls into souls and hollows out holes. You know, it's a dark one, but it's part of the festival. Mm-hmm. It's just part of the festival. Like it is.
What have your depression's been caused by, if you don't mind me prying, since we have totally abandoned my preparation here. I'm just going to trash it.
No, don't trash it. It might, who knows? It'll circle back. I want to talk about festivals. I miss them. My depression my first depression was triggered by, I got sent to a emotional growth boarding school when I was 17 because I was like a bad kid and did a bunch of drugs. And I really believed in the program that they presented, which is just like so much intense group therapy and like going inside and like finding the things that are broken in you and then divulging them. But it was tethered to a kind of reward system. So like if you were more divulging of your pain experience, especially crying, you actually got more privileges in this weird school I went to. So like by the time I was, in what was called upper school, the school right before the leadership school, I was already like running a building, running a committee, and like essentially like about to be the head of student government. And I was just like accruing these privileges. And it wasn't entirely just because of crying in therapy, but that was a piece of it, right? And so I just like, I wanted to win. I wanted to like beat the game. And the game at that time was to like do the most fucking emotional growth work you could do. So I would just like dive deep to find anything that I could cry about. And a day came where it didn't work. And I reached inside myself and I found nothing. And it was a split second and all the color drained out of the room. It happened in a moment. And it just like, I went like so deep down into a depression so immediately. And because I'd done such a good job of all the things they told me to do, the school just kind of left me alone and like didn't make me do anything. So I spent my last like 6 months at the school playing guitar by myself in my dorm pretty much, and like kind of going to some classes, and like it was a very odd time. And I ended up going on SSRIs, and that wasn't the right thing for me. So there was a sort of a rocky period with that. But I'm here now and I'm very grateful. But, I definitely, especially in psychedelic journeys, I definitely spend time going back and giving that angsty young man a hug. Yeah. And be like, just hold on. You have no idea how majestic your adventure will be. Just hold on. And I go back and I hug him. Oh. And I like to think that there were moments in my life when the depression cleared a little bit that I didn't know why. And it was actually like future Eamon coming and being like, just hold on, baby. Just hold on. It's going to be so good.
Yeah, I don't doubt it, man. I love the circular time theory stuff, man. That's my jam. But that seems super counterintuitive, man, that you would be diving super deep into yourself, looking for things to be upset about, to emotional traumas to deal with, and it would lead you to become actually depressed. Doesn't that seem counterintuitive? Oh,
well, it was
fake.
False.
Okay.
I mean, they weren't fake, but I was like performing
Gotcha.
grief. I was like finding anything that I could work with that would make myself, I was trying to manipulate my own system. And of course, I think it was also like I said, I think there was aspects of depression that were coming in before. That's part of why I was doing all the drugs and like messing up. And, you know, I also had a deep wound around my sexuality and my confusion around my sexuality. I had a deep wound about my relationship with my father as a child. There was all sorts of shit at play. Mm-hmm. And then I was in this extremely, frankly, irresponsible personal growth boarding school, where untrained professionals were pushing kids to like have extreme emotional experiences that were then unintegrated. It was a fucking circus. So,
you said your father was depressed too, so that runs in your family.
We got it all over, all through. And I'm into these days. I'm into the idea of ancestral trauma and epigenetic markers. And I don't know enough about the epigenetic thing. I can't speak about it in scientific language, even though it's a scientific thing. But basically, that we have genes, and then our epigenes are actually, they're not our genes, but they're things that turn genes on and off. And that you can kind of turn on a proclivity for depression or like turn it off. And they're doing, I say they, actually, my former psychiatrist, Dr. David Rabin, and some others are doing a massive study on psychedelics and epigenetic markers. Super interesting stuff.
That's cool. I saw he was on Tim Ferriss recently. That's tight. Did that have something to do with that research?
Yeah, well, Tim Ferriss was actually on their Psychedelic Hour Clubhouse.
Oh, okay.
And I was on it too because I asked a question.
I saw that.
I was. I felt pretty cool to have my voice on the Tim Ferriss show since it's been so influential for me. Yeah.
That's cool, man. I'm glad that you have come out of that experience the way you did, and that now you're going back and giving your younger self some pats on the back. That's good, man.
I am so grateful for a perspective of, okay, how do I want to say this? Because it's so alive for me right now, because I'm like going through it right now. I have such an unflinching epistemological optimism, and it is so steadfast now that when shit goes down, I just meet it. You know, like I did at Bogo with the Bwiti people in Gabon. That was gnarly as fuck.
Damn.
It was hard as fuck, but I loved it because I just met it, and I met it. And like right now, I'm working with early childhood trauma through the lens of saying goodbye to the woman that I thought I'd spend my life with. That's fucking hard. But I'm going to go do some solo camping and give it up to nature and see what that looks like. Mm-hmm. And it's all still a festival. It's all still this magical pageantry of life that I have the enormous privilege to get to participate with. And there's this Hafiz poem that's been really resonating with me lately, where the first line is, "I hold the lion's paw whenever I dance." You know, like, you could dance with it. You want to talk about festivals?
I was going to just swing it back, but
swing it back. Let's just swing it back.
Have festivals played a role in your growth in terms of your emotional, and like what has that role been? What festivals have been most pivotal for you?
Yeah, so Burning Man, and also Burning Man. Also Africa Burn, also the Nordic Burn, also Burning Man parties. Burning Man culture has given to me so much. And let me give a shout out to your listeners. If you have the means, donate the cost of a Burning Man ticket to Burning Man right now, because they need it. And if they can't come back next year, they need our support. So if you have the means, donate to the Burning Man organization, for God's sake. I first went to Burning Man in 2010, and I was like, I'd had a bunch of like good reframes right before that. Like I stopped blaming my dad for all my problems. That super helped. I started taking an amino acid supplement called SAM-E, which was great for my mental health. It helped with my methylation cycle. So like what I believe happens in my brain is that my brain has a harder time creating the neurochemicals that make me happy. And so I have to work harder to create them. And this particular amino acid is part of that process. And so it actually helps. 5-HTP is as well. 5-HTP is like the closest serotonin precursor. I don't know, but I feel that's part of it. So I discovered that. I went to South America with my mom, and I met a shaman who blew tobacco in my face. And I feel like that was part of it. And then I moved to San Francisco, and I started a funky dance band called I Can Dress Myself. And I started like, if I don't blame my dad for all my problems, what life do I want to live? And I was like, oh, I want a funky dance band in San Francisco. So like all of that was in the milieu. And then my friend was like, let's go to Burning Man. Because that's like, we got this cool dance music we're doing. Like everybody's going to Burning Man to do this. Let's go to Burning Man. And went to Burning Man. And a huge part of my suffering in my life has been around gender and sexuality. I definitely have a female inside me. I'm primarily male. I'm primarily heterosexual male. I don't feel trans at all, but I actually have like a girl part of me, and my relationship to her has been a huge part of my life and growth. And when I was a little boy, I got the thing that, you know, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I got the thing that kind of everybody gets, which is like, you're gay, that's gay. Gay is the worst thing. You don't want to be gay. Anything feminine is gay. And so I had a lot of wounding around this fear of being gay, this desire not to be gay, which essentially meant anything feminine, which meant like the color purple, which I love, which meant like singing, which I love, which meant dancing, which meant all these things I love that I then had to exile for myself. And when I first went to Burning Man, it was the first time that I truly saw that gay straight binary upended. Like, people at Burning Man, like, they weren't like gay or straight. They're just a bunch of fabulous weirdos doing whatever the fuck they wanted, and they were cool. And I really wanted to be cool for a lot of my life. And I was just like watching these men gallivanting around in like flowing gowns and these floppy hats, and I was just like, and they were so cool. They were like David Bowie cool. And I'd never seen that before, and I'd never been invited into that before. And so for me, that's a huge part of what festival culture has been in my life over the past decade, is like the opportunity to just play and express and let these really like repressed parts of myself out in the world. And I think it was extraordinarily helpful for my mental health. I think also just like doing a shit ton of psychedelics in the desert was probably mostly good for my mental health. Yeah. More or less. I mean, give a little, take a little, but yeah, and just being in an environment that felt as free and magical and otherworldly as Burning Man, I consider discovering Burning Man and discovering ayahuasca as two thresholds in my life that were like particularly fantastical, like reminded me that life is magic. And Burning Man was like, oh my God, this is a magical place where you can just be magic. And it was just so healing. And when I first got back from Burning Man, for literally 2 weeks, I was like, I will never be afraid again. I'm just never going to be afraid. I'll just do whatever the fuck I want. And I'll just be fabulous and weird and playful and all the things that matter most in my heart of hearts, in my most intimate places. But of course, that's not the way life works. Yeah. Life doesn't give you a one and done. You get the vision, and then you do the work. And you kind of go back a little bit, and then you get another vision, and you kind of do the work. So... but yeah, all praise to Black Rock City for the bounty it's brought me and so many others.
Yeah. What do you think specifically it was about? I mean, you already said that seeing the example of people that you kind of wanted to emulate was massive for you in releasing a lot of the trauma and embracing this true self of yours that you wanted to see. But what is it about Burning Man that allows them to do that allows everyone to do that isn't present in society? Like, is it just the rules and all of the
principles
that we have in society that are keeping people from experiencing that true self? Like, what is so special about Burning Man that makes that accessible?
Well, Burning Man is certainly a positive feedback loop. So I'm sure that, as I saw men liberated from traditional gender roles and experimented, so too then others see that in me, right? There's a couple things about Burning Man that make it so special. One is the 10 principles are pretty solid. And the idea of creating a decommodified space is a strong one. Like the getting out of the I-it transactional relationships into the I-thou, like connected relationships. That's a philosopher named Martin Buber, maybe? I-it, I-thou. But getting more into these, like, if you're not having to toggle between a transactional interaction and a personal interaction, I feel like you open more. You're not like this membrane that's like slamming shut and opening and slamming shut and opening. That membrane actually gets to like really expand. So I think you're much more receptive to others, and you're much more receptive to what you're seeing. I also like that Burning Man is an earned adventure. It's definitely type 2 fun. It's a pilgrimage. You have to go out in the middle of nowhere. And my friend Josh has this great line about Burning Man, which is contrived hardship to expedite bonding. So you like have this, like, you're a bunch of, mostly privileged people living in these kind of atomized lives where, you've got your air conditioning and you get in your car and it's like, life has kind of taken away, or the structure of modern capitalism has kind of taken away some of the rough edges of life that actually enliven you. And so to go out in the desert and really experience battling against the dust storms and having to ratchet down your tent and huddling in an art piece, all that stuff I think creates a heightened experience and a heightened availability for learning and exploring and changing your mind state. I mean, I very much see Burning Man as a kind of acid experience. Like we do acid there, but it's also like its own trip,
Yeah.
So there's a lot of heightened experiences. And I think it's also just like, it's the particular mythos of that place. It's that way because we think it's that way. So we show up and make it that way. It's like, you got to believe in it. And when people stop believing in Burning Man, Burning Man has changed and it's not good enough. Well, show up and make it what you like and it'll be good. Complain about what it's not and stay home, or, shit all over it. Like, you're hastening it towards exactly the thing you don't want it to be.
Do you think Burning Man has changed?
100%.
Yeah.
Changes every year. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
It's an iterative experiment in community. Every year it's torn down and built back up. And it's not different than the world. It reflects the place it's in. There is racism in the world. There is major issues around whiteness in the Bay Area and in the US. And that is magnified. Again, like an acid trip, Burning Man's a bit of a non-specific amplifier. The racial issues in the US end up actually being kind of amplified at Burning Man because people come in with their unconscious biases, try to create a new world, and accidentally kind of create the old world. So it's not a perfect place. It's not a place that is utopic or free from all the other shit. It's not that there aren't billionaires. It's a more intense version of what's already happening, particularly in its region, which in this case its region really is primarily the Bay Area as its like main hub, more so than Reno in terms of culture. So of course you get like the billionaires and the and the Instagram influencers and all that drama. And so every year it changes. And is it worse? I mean, I don't know. I mean, was it horrible when I went in 2010? No, it was the best thing I ever saw. But that might have been horrible to someone who went in 2000 and it changed. Yeah. Life just changes. Shit just changes. And one of the things that's great about Burning Man culture is there's all the regionals. Burning Man is three things. It's Burning Man, which is the Black Rock City event. It's the Burning Man organization, which is the group that creates that event as well as other initiatives. And then it's the global culture. And the cat's out of the bag on the global culture. It's just a global culture now. It's mutating and morphing in Sweden and in Israel and in all of these other places.
Well, I want to go back to something you mentioned about it being a reflection of society, because before we talked, I had this kind of question in my mind. Let's not forget the original discussion point was how can Burning Man or festival culture at large maybe help us navigate this moment in general, and this moment right now that we're going through in society, particularly with the calls of police brutality and social justice. Crime is like a central thing to all that stuff, right? That crime is causing police interactions, which is leading to videos that we see and are terrified by. So I was like, well, how much crime happens in Burning Man versus the US? And this is really interesting. This is very interesting. So in 2018, did the math. I had a couple of friends who were way smarter than me check my math to make sure I was doing this right. But the rate of arrests, and this is just arrests, not crime actually, but the daily rate of arrests per 1,000 people in Burning Man last year was 0.085 arrests per 1,000. Can you guess what the rate of arrests is in the US at large? 0.085 per 1,000 in 2018. Literally, wow. Almost exactly the same. Yeah. That kind of blew my mind, and because I was expecting it to be less in Burning Man. I was expecting there to be, because I guess I've only been once, and I kind of in a way do view it as utopian. It is, to me, a sacred place. It seems different than society. It is different than our daily society. And so I was just surprised by that. And I wonder what thoughts you have on that similarity.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't necessarily extrapolate like anything precise from that necessarily, because, okay, if you look at Burning Man, it's crawling with cops. There's like sheriffs, there's like FBI, there's like BLM. They all know there's a shit ton of drugs there, and they're like trying to like get at that. So I think that it might be interesting. Sorry,
BLM, just to clarify, since we're talking about Black Lives Matter, you mean Bureau of Land Management. Yeah,
Bureau of Land Management.
Yeah.
I think what might be helpful if you wanted to go deeper on these numbers is to look at like rates of death, look at different kinds of crimes, look at, just kind of explore some different. I mean, I'm not really like a statistics numbers guy, but I think it'd be interesting to take different data sets around this issue and kind of see, because the fact that the numbers are exactly the same, I don't know that I would then say, oh, well, Burning Man's exactly the same, because I think there's different factors in play in different ways.
Yeah.
And also it kind of depends like what, why are you doing that work? What are you trying to, what conclusion are you hoping to get? What are you hoping to learn from it?
My initial hope was to find that in a place where there feels to be less structure and that there's more openness and courage, that those numbers would be lower. But like you said, the way that police are policing that festival is much different than how they're policing a city in general. So I don't know. My initial thought was to just compare, say if society was to just fall apart, if U.S. society was to just disintegrate, and in the vacuum, something like Burning Man became our new society, would that be better? Or would it be less crime filled? Would it be better overall? That was kind of just the question in general.
Ooh, that's a big old question. I think this is above my pay grade. If society collapsed and then in the wake of it, it turned into something like Burning Man, I feel like that'd be a pretty nice result of society collapsing. I feel like society collapsing is probably going to go a lot worse than that. Yeah. And, I think it's interesting, but I don't think that I have anything interesting to say about it.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair.
I think that's a great question to ask someone who knows numbers in a different way than I do.
Yeah. Fair.
And you can take it out or not. I don't mind.
Yeah. It's just interesting to wonder about how do people act in Burning Man towards each other versus society? And in that number of arrest rates, obviously you're getting people who are doing drugs and not hurting anybody else. But I was just trying to get a picture of, are people better people whenever they go to Burning Man than whenever they are in society?
I don't know. That's a tricky question. I mean, I think if you wanted to run that experiment, I would look just at what people are getting arrested for and like try to get more data. The broader question of whether people are better people at Burning Man, I don't know, and I don't know that it necessarily matters.
Why not? Why don't you think so?
Well, there's a lot in all of that. I mean, what is a better person? Like, what does that mean? And I don't know. I most of the things that I speak on, I like to like feel like I kind of have some bearing, but I just don't really have any bearing on it. And yeah,
that's fine. All good. Well, yeah, I feel like come to a stopping point here.
Wait, we're stopping now?
It's been 90 minutes too. Well,
yeah,
almost.
but we I mean, we didn't quite stick the landing.
Yeah,
we got into numbers I didn't understand, and then we sort of. Well, this is an interesting point as a podcaster, because I sometimes get to a place where I feel a little bit stuck, and energetically, when that happens, I can feel like I lose a lot of energy, and because I'm like I'm corralling the conversation in a certain way, and then we get to a place, and I'm like, fuck, I've kind of lost it. I don't know if you're feeling that in this moment.
For sure. Yeah.
And so don't abandon it.
All right.
Let's see what there is to learn in this moment. Because there's no mistake. It's an emergent experience. You know, we got to a place where like it wasn't quite clicking, not between you and I personally, but in terms of like conversationally, kind of lost it a little bit. Mm-hmm. So how do you want to, like, in the evolving podcaster that you are becoming, how is this, in this exact moment, a lesson that you can be enormously grateful for? How do you want to use this moment to expand your finesse as a podcaster?
It's a good question.
May I give you a suggestion?
I would love a lifeline right now.
Yeah. So first of all, get in your body. Deep breath, shake a little, just change it up. Change up, because that kind of halting is like, so you gotta shift it, shake it out.
For sure.
We've, and obviously I'm fine going over 90 minutes. You wanted to talk to me. We've gone deep on some really cool things, particularly mental health, which I think it's great considering both of our backgrounds that we talked about. There's a lot of other cool things to talk to me about. So you have me right now.
That's true.
And don't worry about the edit. You'll make it work. You'll figure it out in the edit. You can, you'll cut and paste. Maybe this moment of the podcast right now that we're having right now, maybe this is the most interesting part of the podcast, and maybe it stays. Who knows? It's yours. It's your podcast. And you can always clean up or throw things away in the edit. So it doesn't matter. In real time, you don't have to get it right? You just, I'm here. I'm with you. Yeah. I definitely got a little like, I don't really understand when we were talking about like the numbers. There was nowhere I could go with it.
Yeah.
But I'm not in any way defeated. Like I'm here and I'm still going.
Nice.
So
I'm glad you're still with me, man.
Yeah, of course. And actually, I think that this moment is actually very interesting because we're both podcasters. And moments like these, I did a podcast recently where I was speaking to someone I admired enormously. And we were talking about sovereignty, personal sovereignty. And just as I'm like right in it, someone opens the door and we're recording in the music studio at Wildwood. And he's a guy I don't know that well, but he's like one of these people that, well, let me just say, like, he has his ideas of what things should be. And he interrupts. And then instead of being like, oh, sorry, he's like, guys, this is the music room. So like, and then he just shuts the door and walks out, like as if it was weird that we were doing a podcast in the music space. And I was so mad at him. I was like, here I was talking about sovereignty. And then, oh, he knocked me off my sovereignty. In the moment, I was talking to my guest about sovereignty. So what did we do? Pretty quickly, we were like, we just talked about it. We talked about how he knocked me off my sovereignty. And we actually got a teaching moment about the very topic we were discussing in real time on the podcast. So I'm publishing that podcast tomorrow. And of course, I'm keeping that part in.
Yeah. It was never a question of I'm definitely not taking this out. I'm happy to share with people my failures as well as my successes.
Failure? Nothing. Not a failure.
It was
maybe foible.
A foible.
You can take maybe foible.
It was just interesting because in prepping for this, I found this so interesting, and I was like, "Ooh, we're going to talk about this thing so deeply. We're gonna like."
Oh, so so this wasn't just a question. This was something that already had a story attached to it.
I know.
There was an expectation of something that was going to go here. And instead, it actually went the opposite. Like, I didn't connect to it at all.
Yeah.
And so that probably brought up some feelings.
Yeah, it definitely did. I just wanted to run away pretty bad.
Yeah? But you're staying.
Yeah.
You're not running away.
No.
How does it feel to stay and want to run away at the same time?
It feels good to get past that initial urge to bury my head in the sand, for sure. I am grateful now that I am still here, for sure.
Eric, do you know how badly I want to run away from the experience that I'm having right now? Not with you, but like in my life with the separation. Mm-hmm. Do you know how desperately, how panicked I get when I just want her back so bad? Mm. I just want to run away. That is where the most growth happens.
Yeah.
Because the reason that I am no longer with this incredible woman is because I was not fully anchored in my own self-worth. I was projecting onto her the validation that I needed, which made me hypersensitive to her and really was a huge piece of our constant conflicts. And that was because I couldn't sit with the discomfort of her maybe not, me thinking that she didn't love me the way I needed her to because I didn't have that love in myself. And so now I'm in this place in Seattle, mostly by myself, and I want to run away so fucking badly. I want to call her so badly. But every time I don't, every time I just do some breath work, do some yoga, every time I ride that wave all the way over, something happens in me where I'm building this trust with my little boy, and I'm like, it's okay. We can do this.
Yeah.
That intolerable sensation, it's not intolerable. Mm-hmm. And every single time I ride that wave, I'm getting stronger. And, not that it's exactly analogous to the experience that you're having in this moment, but here we are, that sensation of wanting to run away is dissipating. Mm-hmm. And in its wake, there's a strength of the person who didn't run away. The person who ran away just died because the person who didn't run away stayed. And that part of you that wanted to run away, you shed that. You shed a little bit of that.
Well, I appreciate you not obliging my desire to run away because
I was so abrupt.
I know. I was just like, I just looked at my notes and I was like, well, none of these matter anymore. So let's just end it. And, that having stayed, I mean, I've had a podcast before that didn't go very well. And I kind of did a similar thing where I didn't, we had almost reached our allotted time and I was like, okay, well, I don't really have any more questions. And it was a very lame ending that I was completely unsatisfied with. And it was kind of a bigger guest, afterwards, that feeling of just being like, wow, you totally chickened out of that moment and you totally just gave in to your like fear of running away. That felt really bad. And I can just picture myself now. If that had happened here, I would feel like shit. But I'm chilling.
Well, there's an important thing in that too, because okay, I'm doing some work around fear and around, like, I was a terrified little boy, right? And that fear was not empowered. I wasn't told, oh, you're so scared. I'm so sorry. That must be so hard for you. Let me be with you while you're scared. That's actually one of the most essential pieces of what was so difficult for me as a little boy, was to be so scared and to feel so alone in that fear. Terrifying. Mm-hmm. What I'm learning now is that I have to join my fear is in that little boy part of myself. So I have to join that fear, and I have to be with that. So we cause more harm on ourselves by the meanness after the thing that happened. We've had an incredible podcast. I've had a lovely time. The fact that we had a little moment does in no way invalidate it to me.
Right.
I don't think it's, and for you as a podcaster, you could give it a little wrap up, cut that out. Nobody's going to be the wiser. It's just your relationship to yourself.
Yeah.
And so this is similar to like not running away. It's like, how do we change the script in that moment? Like in that moment, oh, I fucked up. Oh, that was so good and it just ended. It's like, hey, I understand. Oh, you feel that way. I love you though. You actually did a really great job.
Yeah.
It's okay that happened. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
And you just talk to yourself. I do that shit so much these days. I just talk to little Eamon and I'm just like, yeah, you're scared. You're lonely. You miss her. It's hard. I know. I'm here. All the things that I wanted to hear when I was little, I say to myself every day right now.
Only whenever you're feeling the fear, or even whenever things are good?
Oh, that's an interesting point. I celebrate myself, but nicely done you. I hadn't really thought about it that way. I mean, I celebrate myself, but I definitely don't do the same. I don't necessarily. I do a little bit. Like I do a little. Like you did a good job. But when I'm really like fully aligned, I actually don't feel like my little boy needs it. So I don't necessarily like explicitly give it to him. So that's actually an interesting thing to explore. Yeah. I wonder what that might feel like to do that same process of, hey, you did so good.
Yeah.
I guess I feel like I'm so focused on the piece that I want to heal that I'm utilizing a therapeutic tool for healing, but I'm not necessarily potentiating the positivity by grounding it deeply.
Yeah.
That might be something
I'm going to try it. I honestly have never taken the time to, coddle or reaffirm the child in myself in the way that you've mentioned in this podcast. And I can see the value in that because, just this experience that just happened right now, I was ready to kind of listen to that, as I mentioned before, that fear, and not talk to it as a grown-up or not talk to it as an adult who cares about it, to kind of just go with it. It's like when a kid throws a temper tantrum or something, you just give the kid what it wants. It's not learning anything. It's learning something bad, if anything, right? You need to. And so, yeah, I appreciate you kind of bringing this perspective into my life today, man.
That's like why I podcast. I like the vulnerability of the real human experience of creating together. There's an amazing quote from James Carse, who actually died this week. James Carse, incredible philosopher, wrote the book Finite and Infinite Games. Have you heard of this book?
No.
Oh my God. Must read. Top 5. Finite and Infinite Games. And basically the whole book is broken down into finite and infinite games. And anything can be looked at as a game that is finite, that is played to end the game and win, or infinite, which is a game that's played to create more games. And he breaks down everything about life. And it's obvious, like, you want to play infinite games. You want to be in that mindset. And he does a breakdown about infinite players and finite players, and openness and vulnerability. And the quote is, and it's actually a guiding principle of my podcast, which is, infinite players play in complete openness. It's not openness as in candor. It's openness as in vulnerability. And it's not about exposing the fixed self that has always been, but it's about, and this isn't the exact quote, I don't have it fully memorized. It's not about exposing the fixed self that has always been, but it's about revealing and therefore kind of creating the dynamic self that is yet to be.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. Well, I wish I just had it to read to you, because I'm kind of biffing the end of it. But I'll do it in my own words.
Okay.
So infinite players play in complete openness. It's not about I'm open with you by revealing who I really am, and that's a fixed thing that I'm now revealing to you. By playing in complete openness, I'm actually creating the dynamic self that I have yet to be. That dynamic self is emerging and evolving in every moment through the very process of openness. So I'm not being open to reveal something that is, okay, here's my deep secret. Now you know me. By having this conversation in the way that we're having, we're actually learning about ourselves in real time, and our dynamic future selves are being born in every moment by virtue of our openness.
I like that.
Shout out to James Carse.
That's good. This reminds me of like if there was water in some sort of vessel that was changing, the water would flow into that empty space and kind of grow with it, right?
Well, yeah, and like we just had a moment that was where you got stalled and had an emotional and seemed like also like a nervous system response to it.
Oh yeah. Deer in the headlights, straight up.
Yeah. We stayed, and so that had a transformative effect on you to a certain degree. And see how that plays out. See what you think about it afterwards. Then also, while we're talking about this, I'm extolling the virtues of soothing my inner child. And you, who no one has actually ever said this to me, was like, well, but do you do the same thing when you celebrate? And I never even fucking thought. I don't know why. I never thought about that. And there's a sort of like, now there's a new emergent possibility that comes out of that moment. And it came directly out of sticking with your moment that then gave me that moment. And I find that whole thing, that whole process, just so confirming of just the beauty and the fractal emergence of life as, like, I think about life as this kind of like evolving fractal thing where it just keeps sort of growing and changing, and it's aware it is itself doing it, and it doesn't know where it's going because it's just happening, and that we are consciously aware of this because we have these Homo sapien brains that can kind of be aware of it, but that all of life is doing this as one grand sort of orchestra concurrently. And when we make the choice to be honest and open and kind, we make the choice to be courageous in the face of what's happening. We're kind of leaning into the evolution of all of life.
I like that.
For those of you listening, my assumption is that Eric will keep this part in the show. You're not obligated to, but my assumption is that you will. And we're towards the end of, we're over 90 minutes, so you will have stuck with us this far. Yeah. I wonder, you at home, listener, I wonder what is happening for you in observing this, in the intimacy of audio, on your walk with your earbuds in, whatever. Like, what is it in your life that you want to stay with when you would usually run away? And what might happen if you did? What might happen if you stayed with it?
Maybe this was that moment for them, that awkwardness that they just went through.
Well, I think we're sticking the landing.
Yeah. I do too, man. Much better than it was 20 minutes ago.
It's all part of it.
Yeah.
It's all part of it. How you feeling?
Great. A little hot. It's hot in my apartment, but maybe that's just also me.
Any reverberations of it?
What do you mean? Like,
do you feel any kind of tension in your system, or does it feel kind of released?
It feels mostly released. There is a slight like lingering disappointment of just like not having stuck the landing that I envisioned for myself. But then there's also kind of a self-satisfaction of having not run away from the moment and gotten something good out of it. So, yeah.
Well,
it's a net gain, I would say.
Well, two things. One, this will feel very different when you like sleep on it and then listen to it. And there's definitely ways you can kind of present it, but still clean it up if that makes you more comfortable, or you could present it all as is, whatever you want to do. So one thing is like, you'll feel interestingly about it afterwards. Mm-hmm. But in this moment, you got activated in some way during this. And what I find to be really helpful, and what I suggest maybe trying after we close here, is shaking. Have you ever done any like trauma shaking?
No.
Oh, it's great. So when a lion is about to catch a deer, and then the deer gets away, antelope, I don't know what if lions eat deers. And the antelope gets away, and the antelope is safe. As soon as the antelope is safe, it will do this like crazy weird shaking thing. It'll just like do this weird, and I think all animals do this. But basically, their nervous systems have gotten so activated in the fight or flight, in this case flight, and they naturally then reset their nervous systems by doing like this really elaborate shake of their bodies. And I find that it's a really powerful way, because for humans, we have fight, flight, or freeze responses to social experiences, because it's wired into our brains that life and death is connected to social validation. Mm-hmm. If the tribe does not include you and you're left out in the cold, you will die. So we have an evolutionary impulse to take social interaction with the seriousness with which a gazelle, that's what I meant, a gazelle might respond to the experience of a lion chasing them. We don't have lions chasing us, but we have a constant steady drip of anxiety producing social interactions on social media, etc. Great thing to do, be like the gazelle. Shake it out.
I'm going to do it right now.
Do it right now. Get up and wiggle. I said get up and wiggle. Get up and just right. do a whole crazy thing.
1 second.
Make it weird. Make it super weird. Okay, how does that feel?
That felt real good.
Yeah, right? It's so good.
That felt great. I like that. I'm going to add it to my my repertoire.
So great when you get a new tool. It's like a video game. You're like, oh shit, I'm gonna use this on the next time I have to fight that boss. I just started adding Wim Hof breath work to some of the. Yeah, I have like vagal nerve. Like so much anxiety in my stomach, and I wake up at 4 a.m. feeling like crap because I'm going through a breakup, and then I do Wim Hof breathing, and I just meet it because I got a new tool.
He has an app. Have you downloaded it?
I do. I'm using the app. Yeah, I like to track my shit.
Me too. I did that before hopping on here with you, actually.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that funny?
Yep.
Well, shall I tell the listeners where they can find me?
Yes, please do. Please do.
I anticipated the traditional podcast closing. Okay, so my podcast, Life is a Festival, is my personal podcast, and it's the one that actually the Psychedelic Therapy one's getting its own audience these days, but that's kind of the one that I do the journeys about myself, talk a lot about these subjects, not just festivals. And then I also do another podcast for Maya Health, which is a psychedelic software company making software for therapists to use to support psychedelic healing, which I'm very proud of being a part of. And I do a podcast for us, called the Psychedelic Therapy Podcast. And you can find out whatever you want about me at eamonarmstrong.com. And you can follow me on Instagram, because it's nice when people follow you on Instagram. I don't follow that many people on Instagram, but you can follow me on Instagram. And then maybe if I met you, then anyway, I didn't stick the landing on that. Now I just sound like an asshole. Follow me on Instagram, but I won't follow you. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's transactional.
Super transactional. Yeah, it's like the people listening are just like, this guy seems really cool and really together. Did he just say he wouldn't follow me back? What the heck? Just ruined it.
No, not getting any followers off that one.
Got none. 0 followers. Why was I on this podcast if I don't get any Instagram followers?
God damn it. Pointless. Well,
no, it wasn't pointless, man. I had a great time. Yeah. I really enjoyed it. And I'm glad you stuck with it. And I'm glad we stuck with it. Same. And we got to have that deeper experience and drop a layer deeper with each other. I really appreciated that. I appreciate the fact that you took the time. You're gracious with your time for me. And yeah, like I said at the top, man, your podcast is dope. I think you're an awesome host. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. Well, I think you're a great host as well, and I appreciate you having me on your show. And I'm excited to hear, send me a message about how this is landing in the next day or two. Yeah, I will, man. All right. Pleasure talking to you, Eric. Likewise, Eamon.